August 15th, 1944. 21,000 feet above eastern France. The night is cloudless. A hard black dome filled with stars so bright they shimmer against the cold air rushing past the fuselage of a Dornier Du 217. The crew inside feels the soft vibration of its BMW engines, steady and reassuring, the rhythm of a machine they believe no American aircraft can find in this darkness. Oberleutnant Karl Brenner leans forward in his seat, adjusting the drab leather strap of his oxygen mask. He peers through the forward canopy, but sees nothing except the silver glint of moonlight brushing along the bomber's wings. Below, France lies in shadow, its scattered pockets of fire long since extinguished by distance. Up here, the night has always belonged to the Luftwaffe. Every man aboard the Dornier believes that. They have flown through darkness for years, immune to the clumsy attempts of Allied fighters to find them without the sun. A quiet knock against the metal bulkhead behind him signals Feldwebel Marcus Ehret, the radio operator, who is hunched over a dim red map light. He whispers through his mask. Route is clear. No enemy night fighters reported. Brenner nods. He trusts the night. He trusts the emptiness around them. He trusts the belief that no American aircraft has the equipment to hunt a plane cloaked by the moon and clouds. 2 miles behind the Dornier, invisible in the void, the P-61 Black Widow prowls. Its twin Pratt and Whitney engines hum with a lower, deeper tone than the Dornier's, the sound swallowed by the night. The dark paint absorbs what little light touches it. Its silhouette is nearly indistinguishable from the sky itself. Inside the cockpit, illuminated by the ghostly green glow of instruments, First Lieutenant John Haynes keeps his gloved hands steady on the control column. The Widow is built for this. Everything about its design feels predatory in the darkness. Long wings for silent lift, a bulbous crew pod for the 3 men inside, and a radar dish buried in its nose like the eye of some nocturnal hunter. Behind Haynes, sitting at a bank of glowing screens, is radar operator Staff Sergeant William Carter. He leans forward, scanning the sweep of the SCR 720 display. A thin line rotates in a slow mechanical rhythm, and on each pass it returns a faint pulse, a small blip, steady, growing stronger. Contact at 9 miles, altitude holding, course stable, Carter says, his voice calm. This is the moment German pilots never believed could exist. A moment where another aircraft in total darkness knows exactly where they are, down to the nearest 100 yards. Haynes responds with a slight push on the throttles. The Widow edges closer, gaining altitude, matching the Dornier's movement with delicate precision. The P-61 carries firepower that no German pilot has ever seen from an American night fighter. 4 20mm Hispano cannons in the belly and 4 50 caliber machine guns mounted in a remote turret. Yet none of that matters if they are seen too soon. Carter watches the bars on his screen tighten. 5 miles. 4. The pulses grow brighter, sharper. The radar paints the sky in a pattern only he can understand. A map in which the Dornier shines like a beacon. What do you have? Asks the third crewman, Gunner Technical Sergeant George Mills, from his seat in the turret compartment. Still on him, Carter says. He doesn't know we're here. The Widow approaches unseen, hidden by the night, hidden by silence, guided by a technology the Luftwaffe refuses to believe exists in operational form. Ahead, Oberleutnant Brenner adjusts his heading. He still sees nothing but stars. Behind him, closing fast, the Black Widow prepares to strike. The Dornier holds its steady path toward the Rhine as Brenner's crew settles into the familiar rhythm of a night run. They believe, as every German night flyer has been taught to believe, that the darkness is their shield. For years, that belief has been earned through blood and fire. When the war began, The Luftwaffe quickly learned that the night sky is a weapon. After the British bombed industrial centers in early 1940, the Nachtjagd, the German night fighter arm, was born. Under the guidance of General Josef Kammhuber, a defensive network of searchlights, radar stations, and night fighter zones grew across Western Europe. It became known as the Kammhuber Line, a vast web of overlapping detection fields designed to funnel RAF bombers into traps. In those early years, German night fighters dominated. Bf-110s and Ju-88s prowled the darkness, equipped with Liechtenstein radar, systems that allowed them to find British aircraft guided by ground controllers. Their crews became specialists in shadow warfare. They learned to listen for the faint hum of enemy engines, to read the hints of moonlight reflecting from a wing, to strike at bombers unaware until the very last second. That experience carved a deep confidence into every trained Luftwaffe flyer. Night was their ally, their home, a domain where they moved with mastery while their enemies stumbled in the blind. By 1943, RAF Bomber Command shifted tactics, relying on massive formations, chaff, and electronic countermeasures. Yet even then, the German advantage in individual night fighting skill remained. Allied fighters could not reliably intercept at night. Their radars were crude. Their converted aircraft were slow, unstable, and often unable to coordinate with ground stations. German pilots joked that American night fighters were ghosts without teeth. They could not be everywhere, and more importantly, they could not see. To Brenner and his crew, this belief has become unshakable. They have flown dozens of missions through moonless nights and returned home with engines cooling and hearts steady. Nothing in their training suggests that an American aircraft could hunt them independently, without searchlights, without ground control, without visual contact. The idea seems impossible. Radar sets that can work accurately airborne, in motion, at altitude, through cloud and darkness, are dismissed as unreliable experiments. Rumors circulate of British mosquitoes using radar to intercept. But many German pilots chalk those stories up to lucky sightings, not true radar precision. This is why Brenner is calm, why his crew is confident, why the Dornier's engines drone without urgency as they cut across the night sky. But the war is changing, and somewhere in the dark behind them, that change is closing the gap mile by mile. The Americans have spent years racing to build an aircraft that can challenge the Luftwaffe's dominion of the night. They have tested prototypes in deserts, mounted early radar sets on awkward airframes, pushed engineers and pilots through endless rounds of frustration. They have learned from Britain's experience, adapted equipment, forged new tactics, and finally delivered a machine purpose-built for darkness. The P-61 Black Widow is the first true night hunter in U.S. service. It carries a radar that can see farther than any airborne system the Germans have ever faced. The SCR-720 is not an experiment. It is not unreliable. It is not a rumor. It is locked firmly onto Karl Brenner's Dornier, and every mile brings the Widow closer. To understand how the Widow found its prey on this night, one must return to the earliest days of the program, long before any American pilot believed a dedicated night fighter was even possible. In 1940, as reports filtered in from Europe describing German night bombing raids and the growing sophistication of the Nachtjagd, a small group inside the U.S. Army Air Corps realized that America lacked any aircraft capable of meeting that threat. Existing fighters were too small, too unstable in darkness, and unable to house the bulky radar equipment that would soon become essential. Northrop Aircraft, led by the obsessive and inventive Jack Northrop, responded to the challenge with a design unlike anything the Air Corps had envisioned. His engineers sketched a twin-engine, twin-boom aircraft with long, high-aspect wings and a central crew pod. It was aggressive in shape, large enough for 3 men and the heavy radar gear, and powerful enough to climb through cloud and weather to hunt in pitch-black conditions. The brass looked at the design with a mix of skepticism and hope. Some believed the aircraft was too large. Others argued that radar could never be made stable enough for airborne interception. Still, the project moved forward, carried by urgency more than confidence. Throughout 1941 and 1942, prototypes rolled out onto the dry concrete of Muroc Army Air Base. Test pilots climbed into cockpits crowded with cables and temporary panels, taking the aircraft up under the hot California sun, before plunging into the desert night for practice runs. There were fuel leaks, engine surges, and the constant challenge of integrating radar equipment that had never been airborne at such scale. Early British sets were used first, unreliable and prone to losing returns when the aircraft banked too sharply. But little by little, the WWII took shape. The crew configuration was refined. The pilot would sit up front with perfect forward visibility. Directly behind him, the radar operator would manage the electronic heart of the aircraft. Above and aft, the gunner would command a remote-controlled turret capable of pivoting through arcs that no human gunner could achieve alone. The aircraft's 4 belly-mounted 20mm cannons gave it the ability to shred any bomber it caught, and the turret provided protection against fighters attempting to latch onto its blind spots. Then came the breakthrough that changed everything. The SCR-720 radar. Developed jointly with British engineers, the new set offered a range far beyond earlier systems. It could detect targets at more than 10 miles, track them with remarkable stability, and provide precise bearing and elevation, even through cloud and moonless skies. For the first time, American pilots could rely on radar as more than an experimental aid. It became the central weapon of the aircraft. Crews trained relentlessly. Radar operators learned to read the glowing sweep of the display as if it were a living map. Pilots practiced closing on targets without ever seeing them until the last few hundred yards. Gunners rehearsed firing sequences that required perfect coordination between turret motion and airframe movement. Every night at training bases from Florida to California, another generation of crews lifted off into the dark, testing the WWII's endurance, speed, and stability. They learned to trust their instruments, to ignore the emptiness outside their canopies, and to follow the cold logic of radar blips rather than instinct. By the time the P-61 crossed the Atlantic and arrived in the European theater, its crews had become specialists of their own. They entered a sky that German pilots still believed belonged only to them. Now, on this August night over France, the WWII's radar, a product of years of design, arguments, failures, and revisions, shows a single bright pulse moving steadily across the screen. A Dornier, unaware, unprotected, out of time. When the first P-61s finally arrived in England in early 1944, the crews of the 422nd and 425th Night Fighter Squadrons stepped out onto the damp concrete of their airfields with a mixture of pride and uncertainty. They had trained through months of darkness back in the United States. But now the real challenge waited across the Channel. Europe's night skies were colder, more unpredictable, and crowded with enemy aircraft that had honed their craft for years. Every German night fighter, every bomber crewman, believed the darkness itself was an ally. Some American commanders were skeptical. They questioned whether the WWII's radar could work reliably amid Europe's dense cloud cover and strong ground clutter. Others doubted the aircraft's size and maneuverability in real combat. The P-61 was larger than any fighter the U.S. had fielded, nearly the size of a medium bomber. Its silhouette, while perfect for blending into the night, seemed unwieldy for tight turns or sudden evasive maneuvers. Pilots and radar operators pushed back against the doubts. They trusted the machine they had trained with. They believed in the cold accuracy of the SCR-720. But trust meant nothing until proven in combat. The first operations were cautious. Crews flew along the coast, scanning for German reconnaissance aircraft and lone raiders probing Allied defenses. More often than not, the radar screen stayed empty. Weather-grounded missions. Inexperienced crews struggled to coordinate radar readings with interception angles. The Widow's heavy weight on takeoff demanded long runways, and one mistake could swallow an aircraft into the mist. But with each passing week, the crews grew more confident. They learned the rhythms of the European night, the noise of distant flak bursts, the flickering glow of burning towns far below, the radio chatter drifting from Allied bombers, returning from deep raids. They learned the German routes, the altitudes they preferred, the timing of their flights into and out of the occupied territories. Gradually, the radar screens began returning more contacts. Some were friendly, some were decoys, others vanished as quickly as they appeared. And then came the first true interception. On a moonlit night in July, a crew from the 422nd locked onto what appeared to be a WWII. The radar operator guided the pilot with calm, clipped instructions. Range decreasing, altitude steady, turn 2 degrees starboard. The blip sharpened. The Widow closed to within visual range, but by then clouds swallowed the target. The contact faded. The WWII escaped, leaving behind only the fading echo on the operator's screen. It was a failure on paper, but a revelation in practice. The Widow had tracked a German aircraft in total darkness without assistance from ground control. For the first time, the crews felt the true potential of the machine. Word spread quickly. Commanders shifted their tone. Radar officers began adjusting tactics. Training intensified. Crews practiced tighter approaches, smoother communication, more precise coordination between pilot, operator, and gunner. Each night, the Widow's presence grew more confident. By August, the aircraft was ready. Crews no longer spoke of radar as an experiment. They spoke of it as a weapon. Now, as First Lieutenant John Haynes holds formation behind the unaware Dornier, he embodies that evolution. He presses a gloved hand gently against the throttle, easing the Widow into perfect pursuit. In the seat behind him, William Carter watches the target pulse grow brighter, more defined. He knows what it means. This is no training run. No, faint contact swallowed by cloud. This is the moment the Widow was built for. Ahead, Carl Brenner still sees only stars and silence. Behind him, the Americans close to within 3 miles. 3 miles. At this distance, the Dornier Do 217 remains nothing more than a steady pulse on Carter's glowing screen. In the cockpit of the P-61, the air feels colder, heavier, as if the darkness itself tightens around the two aircraft locked together in a silent approach. Haynes keeps the Widow level, eyes flicking between the dim horizon and the instrument cluster. He cannot see the Dornier. Not a silhouette, not a shimmer, not the flash of an exhaust flame. But he trusts the voice in his headset. Range 2.7. Altitude matched. He's holding course, Carter says. The radar operator's tone is calm, measured, almost analytical. His world is the soft, circular sweep of the SCR-720 display, the bar of phosphorescent light that paints the sky with each rotation. The Dornier appears as a bright, confident pulse at the top of his screen, unaware of the hunter creeping behind it. Above and aft, Technical Sergeant George Mills adjusts the controls of the dorsal turret. The electric motors hum softly as the guns track forward. He peers into the dim periscope sight, though he knows he will not see anything yet. Haynes angles the throttles forward a fraction. The P-61 responds with a low rumble, closing the distance. Inside the Dornier, Carl Brenner shifts uncomfortably. For a moment, he thinks he feels a faint change in the air, a tremor he cannot fully identify. He looks down at the altimeter. Steady. The engines hum without the slightest hint of strain. The night outside is still silent. He reassures himself. The Americans have no night fighter capable of climbing this high without ground guidance. No radar that can follow a bomber this precisely. The sky belongs to him, but the sky is lying. Range 2 miles, Carter reports. He's starting a shallow descent, matching now. Haynes adjusts the pitch trim. The P-61 lowers gently, the wings slicing the cold air with barely a shiver. The crew moves with a practiced rhythm, each man relying on the others to complete a chain of trust that has been forged through countless training flights. The radar pulse brightens again, 1.5 miles. Mills tenses in his seat. "Let me know as soon as we're close enough for visuals," he says. Haynes doesn't answer immediately. He scans the void ahead. Nothing. Only star fields and darkness stretched endlessly to the horizon. Then Carter speaks with a change in tone, a slight quickening. 1 mile. Target dead ahead. He has no idea. Haynes leans forward, eyes narrowing. His heart beats slightly faster beneath the layers of fleece and leather. This is no training silhouette. This is no blip that will vanish into cloud. This is a living enemy, unaware of the jaws closing around it. "Range 800, Carter says. "You should see him any second." Haynes presses his face closer to the canopy. For a moment, he sees only black. Then, a faint shape materializes, a pale outline, the soft reflection of moonlight brushing the metal skin of the Dornier. He whispers without thinking. "Contact. I have him." The German bomber floats ahead, serene, oblivious, a peaceful silhouette sliding through the night. Brenner remains focused on the instruments. Errett adjusts a dial on the radio. No one inside the Dornier glances behind them. No one suspects what stalks them. "Bring us closer," Mills says quietly. Haynes complies, inching forward until the Dornier fills more of his canopy. Carter's voice is steady. "We're at 500. Perfect angle. He won't see us until it's done." Haynes sets the Widow slightly below the Dornier's tail, the classic night interception position. The belly cannons nestled directly beneath the bomber's vulnerable underbelly. Mills brings the turret forward, guns aligned straight ahead. Inside the Dornier, Errett leans back to stretch. He glances at the map clipped to the console. For one instant, he thinks he sees something flash outside the rear canopy. A glint, a flicker. But before he can speak, the night returns to stillness. Haynes steadies the Widow. Mills' finger tightens on the trigger. "Take him," Haynes says. The P-61 erupts. 4 20mm cannons spit fire upward, tearing through the Dornier's fuselage in a single, violent burst. Tracers punch into the wing root, ripping through fuel lines, smashing instruments, shredding the radio compartment where Errett sits. A bloom of flame erupts from the bomber's belly. Brenner is thrown against his harness as alarms scream. The cockpit fills with sparks and smoke. The Dornier rolls violently, the starboard engine coughing flame before detonating. Haynes banks right, avoiding debris as the burning bomber spirals downward, its glow flickering against the clouds below. Carter watches the radar screen go blank. The pulse that marked the German aircraft disappears completely. "Target destroyed," he says softly. In the momentary silence that follows, the Widow's crew breathes out together, as if releasing months of tension in a single exhale. They have proven themselves, proven the aircraft, proven the radar, proven the night no longer belongs to the Luftwaffe. Far below, the Dornier hits the earth in a brief, violent flash of orange. Above it, the Widow climbs back into the stars, already searching for the next pulse on Carter's screen. The news of the downed Dornier reached the nearest Luftwaffe command post before dawn. At first, the officers on duty believed it was another case of anti-aircraft fire or mechanical failure. Night missions were hazardous, even without enemy fighters, and crews often vanished without leaving a clear trail. But when fragments were recovered, when reports from nearby civilians trickled in, when investigators examined the wreckage under the gray morning light, the story changed. The clean, upward-driven cannon strikes told a different tale. The holes were precise, clustered, unmistakably delivered from below by a fast-moving interceptor. No ground fire could have torn through a bomber at that angle. No mechanical failure could have ripped the fuselage apart so violently and so suddenly. Someone had stalked the Dornier in darkness. Yet German intelligence officers were reluctant to accept the truth. They had spent years studying Allied fighters, and nothing in their assessments suggested that the United States possessed an aircraft capable of radar-guided interception. The most advanced enemy night fighter, the British Mosquito, was a known threat, but its tactics were familiar. The Mosquito hunted with speed and stealth, not with long-range radar precision. But by the second week of August, more reports arrived. One WWII crew from a separate mission reported seeing flashes in the sky behind them, followed by tracers rising upward from a point they swore came out of total blackness. The bomber escaped only because it dove into cloud cover and broke visual contact. The pilot, Lieutenant Erich Vollmer, described the encounter with unease. "We were followed by something we could not see," he said during debriefing. The guns fired from below, no searchlights, no moon silhouette. It was as if the night itself shot at us. Commanders dismissed the testimony as nerves. Then a Bf-110 night fighter failed to return from a patrol near Metz. The crew was experienced, well-trained, and flying a route considered safe from Allied interceptors. When wreckage was located days later, the same unmistakable pattern of upward cannon fire marked the remains. Whispers began circulating in the ready rooms and mess halls. Pilots questioned what was now hunting them. Some claimed it had to be a British Mosquito operating with better ground control. Others believed it was a new American aircraft, though no one had seen one clearly. Many insisted the Allies still lacked the technical skill to put such a radar system into combat. But fear has its own way of spreading. In the barracks of a Luftwaffe night bomber group stationed at Lechfeld, men quietly traded rumors that an American night fighter could see in total darkness. They spoke of a machine painted the color of a moonless sky, with eyes in its nose that could follow aircraft miles away. Some mocked the idea, calling it nonsense born of fatigue. Others listened in silence. Oberleutnant Brenner's crew never returned to dispel the rumors. Their absence lingered, a silent confirmation of something unspoken. By early September, the pattern became undeniable. More bombers vanished without distress calls. Pilots who survived near-miss encounters reported being shadowed by an unseen force. A few claimed they saw a wide, twin-boom shape glide beneath them before disappearing into the night. None could explain how it found them so easily. The Luftwaffe's night war doctrine, built on years of dominance, began to crack. The idea that darkness belonged to them no longer held. Younger pilots trained with an edge of anxiety they had never felt before. Veterans who once laughed at Allied night fighter efforts now flew with a nervous glance over their shoulders, scanning for threats they could not see. Within intelligence circles, a single conclusion finally took shape. The Americans had deployed a purpose-built night fighter equipped with advanced radar, capable of independent interception without ground support. No official confirmation existed. No wreckage of the mysterious aircraft had been found. But something was hunting German aircraft with a precision that defied explanation. Something they could not see. Something silent. Something deadly. The Black Widow. By late autumn of 1944, the presence of the P-61 had spread across the European night sky. More squadrons became operational. More crews rotated into combat. Each aircraft arrived wearing fresh paint that reflected no light, absorbing the darkness like a second skin. The Widow did not roar into battle the way other fighters did. It prowled. Crews in the 422nd and 425th Squadrons flew deeper, further, higher, mastering the complex dance of radar interception. They knew how to throttle back just enough to match the slow, heavy pace of enemy bombers. They knew the precise closure rate needed to prevent overshooting a target. They knew how to slip beneath a bomber's blind spot without revealing their engine glow. Every night, as the sun died behind the western horizon, another wave of Widows lifted from airfields across England and France. The long runways shook under the weight of their engines. Pilots tightened oxygen masks. Radar operators adjusted the brightness of their displays. Gunners locked their turrets forward as the aircraft climbed into the cold air above the continent. The Germans noticed the change almost immediately. Radio monitoring posts recorded bomber crews requesting more frequent routing changes. Night fighter bases began delaying their takeoffs until later hours. Searchlight crews widened their sweeps across suspected interception zones, hoping to expose the unseen predator. Luftwaffe engineers even ordered modifications to exhaust dampeners, desperate to reduce the faint glow that could reveal a bomber's tail to an approaching Widow. None of it mattered. The SCR-720 radar did not care about routing changes. It did not need moonlight or silhouettes. It detected metal moving through air, and every aircraft in the sky was made of metal. On the ground, German commanders ordered their night fighters to fly irregular, zigzag courses. The idea was simple: break the radar lock by forcing the American pilot to recalculate constantly. But Carter and men like him trained for exactly that. The radar screens showed every course change, every shallow dive, every acceleration. If anything, erratic maneuvering made the target's motion more predictable on the display. The Luftwaffe attempted electronic countermeasures next. Some crews were equipped with early jamming transmitters meant to disrupt the Widow's radar frequency. They were crude devices, unreliable, and almost useless at altitude. The SCR-720 was hardened against interference, its filters capable of cutting through wideband static. Every attempt to blind the Widow failed in silence. Desperation drove some pilots to fly lower, hugging the treetops where radar clutter might confuse the interception pattern. But this tactic came with its own deadly consequence. The Germans flew into flak pockets, treacherous fog banks, or simply into the ground. Radar operators inside the Widow watched as targets dropped altitude, their pulses becoming erratic. Some vanished on their own without a shot being fired. By November, it was clear the Luftwaffe had no reliable defense. One night near Aachen, a Ju-88 crew attempted something new. They cut their engines entirely, letting the bomber glide in the dark. For almost a minute, they descended silently, hoping the Widow behind them would lose the radar contact. Mills, sitting in the turret of Haynes aircraft, never forgot that moment. The blip on Carter's screen softened, but remained visible. The Widow followed effortlessly. "They tried to hide by becoming ghosts," Carter said later. "But ghosts still have shape. And radar sees shape." When the WWII restarted its engines, flashes burst from the Widow's cannons seconds later. Word of such encounters spread in whispers among German crews. Men looked at the night sky differently now. The stars no longer represented safety. They represented threat. Every dark shape, every shadow, every flicker on the horizon could be a widow rising from below. Veteran Nachtjagd pilots, once confident hunters of RAF bombers, now flew with a tension they had never known. Some refused to turn their backs to the eastern sky, where many P-61 patrols originated. Others insisted on climbing to higher altitudes even when fuel loads did not allow it. Commanders tried to project confidence. They spoke publicly of isolated incidents, of exaggerated reports, of enemy propaganda. But morale does not follow official statements. It follows the truth pilots whisper to each other before takeoff. And the truth was simple. The night was no longer safe. The night no longer belonged to Germany. The Widow had claimed it. The Black Widow surged forward into the empty sky, its engines humming with the steady confidence of victory. Inside the cockpit, Major Thomas Harrington felt the tension in his shoulders begin to ease, though the adrenaline still coursed through him like an electric current. The sky around them was still ink black, but now it carried a different weight. The danger was far from gone. Berlin was sending more raiders west with every passing hour, and the radar operator behind him was already scanning for new contacts. In the rear fuselage, Sergeant Bill Rawlins leaned closer to his scope. The oscillating green lines traced their circular path across the screen, sweeping for the next invisible threat. The subtle crackle of the radar set mixed with the muffled roar of the engines, forming a soundscape that was becoming familiar to every P-61 crew in Europe. Rawlins keyed his mic. "New contact, 30 miles east, altitude 21,000, heading west-northwest, strong return." Harrington adjusted the throttles, the twin Pratt & Whitney engines responding with a smooth rise in pitch. Their aircraft climbed through the cold air, the frost creeping across the edges of the windscreen as the temperature dropped. Ahead lay only darkness, but Harrington could already sense the shape of the enemy. Another Luftwaffe pilot flying blind, convinced that night still protected him, a belief the Black Widow was now shattering night after night. Rawlins kept calling out updates. Range 25 miles, still approaching, speed increasing. Looks like another bomber. Harrington steadied his breathing. He knew that each intercept was a delicate dance. The enemy could change course suddenly. They could spot the Widow's silhouette against the faint glow of distant city fires. They could even hear the engines above the wind. But most of the time, they had no idea death was closing in until the first round struck their fuselage. Rawlins' voice cut through the intercom. 15 miles. Vectors slightly south. He's adjusting course. Harrington angled the Black Widow gently, lining up on the unseen threat. He glanced at the dim red glow illuminating the cockpit. Instruments steady, fuel good, guns ready. The P-61 felt alive beneath him, responsive and eager, like a hunting animal following a scent trail only it could detect. Rawlins spoke again. 10 miles. He's bigger. Stronger return than the Heinkel. Could be a Ju-188. Harrington tightened his grip on the controls. The Junkers 188 was faster and more maneuverable than many bombers, with a reputation for slipping through British night fighting patrols. But the Widow had something no other Allied night fighter possessed, a radar that could track an enemy long before the enemy could even guess it was being hunted. The world outside remained a void, But inside the canopy, Harrington felt an invisible line pulling him toward the target. The radar pulses were guiding him, unseen but undeniable. He could almost feel the bomber ahead of him, a dark shape cutting through cold air, its crew thinking the night sky was still theirs. Rawlins gave the next call. 5 miles. Visual soon if you hold course. Harrington squinted into the blackness, searching for the faintest silhouette, a darker shadow against the night. His breath fogged the inside of his mask as he leaned forward. Then he saw it. A small shape. Very small. A tiny blot moving against the horizon, far away, unaware. He whispered into his mic without thinking, "I see you." The P-61 kept closing. The Widow's long wings sliced smoothly through the air as Harrington powered forward. Rawlins confirmed the alignment. Perfect pursuit angle. He doesn't see us. The target grew larger, resolving into the unmistakable twin-engine profile of the Junkers 188. He could see the glazed nose, the tail assembly, even the faint reflection of starlight on its wings. They were close enough now that the Junkers was no longer just an echo on a screen. It was prey. Harrington steadied the guns. His thumb hovered over the trigger switch. In those seconds, he felt the strange calm that came just before the chaos. The moment every night fighter pilot learned to live for. The narrow gap between patience and violence. Rawlins whispered the final range call. 1,000 yards. Harrington inhaled slowly, tightening the final line of pursuit. The gun sights aligned. The Black Widow settled into position. The sky held its breath with him. The silence of the night shattered as the 4 Hispano 20mm cannons erupted beneath the Black Widow's nose. The recoil rumbled through the airframe, a deep mechanical growl that echoed inside the cockpit. Tracer rounds carved bright white streaks across the darkness, slicing toward the Junkers 188 with surgical precision. The first burst struck the enemy bomber's starboard wing. Harrington saw a flash of sparks, followed by a brief plume of smoke trailing behind the impact point. The German aircraft wobbled, its pilot reacting with sudden panic, jerking the machine into a sharp bank. But it was too late. The Widow was already on him. Rawlins' voice was terse. "Good hits. He's trying to dive." Harrington adjusted instantly, pushing the throttles forward. The P-61 dropped into the bomber's wake, the cold wind roaring across the canopy as they descended. The Junkers was fast, but fear made its movements sloppy. Harrington stayed on its tail, closing the gap with deliberate, relentless control. The German rear gunner opened up. A burst of yellow flashes stuttered from the tail position, and rounds whipped past the Widow's wings. Harrington felt the thumps of several near impacts vibrating through the fuselage. One round zipped so close it left a faint metallic ping on the starboard nacelle. Rawlins warned him. "He's firing blind, but he's close." Harrington grinned tightly behind his oxygen mask. The gunner wasn't firing at the Black Widow. He was firing at the idea of something behind him. He still couldn't see the aircraft hunting them. The darkness hid the Widow just as effectively as it hid the bombers who once thought themselves invincible. With a slight pull on the yoke, Harrington eased upward into a high angle of attack. The P-61 rose silently above the bomber's tail arc, slipping into a pocket the gunner couldn't reach. The Junkers continued to dive, unaware that its attacker had vanished from its limited view. Rawlins updated quietly. "He has no visual. You're clear." Harrington dove. The Black Widow dropped like a predator striking from the treetops. The bomber filled his gun sight instantly. Harrington squeezed the trigger, sending another volley of 20mm rounds hammering into the German aircraft. This time the impacts were catastrophic. Shells punched through the bomber's dorsal fuselage, ripping into the internal fuel tanks. A sudden bloom of fire ignited along the wing route. The Junkers lurched violently as flames spread across its right side. The glow illuminated the German cross on its skin, flickering like a dying lantern. Harrington could almost see the silhouettes of the crew inside scrambling, shouting, trying desperately to maintain control. The bomber rolled into a death spiral. Harrington watched it tumble, a pinwheel of fire against the night. The burning aircraft plunged downward, leaving a molten trail of sparks behind it. Seconds later, it disappeared beneath a layer of drifting cloud, the glow smothered by the darkness below. Rawlins let out a slow breath on the line. "That's two tonight." Harrington leveled off, wiping condensation from the inside of his mask. The Black Widow's engines droned steadily, unbothered by the violence they had just unleashed. Around them, the sky remained vast and empty, as if the night itself swallowed the aftermath. He finally allowed his heartbeat to settle, yet he knew the sortie was far from over. Tonight's radar returns had shown a pattern. German aircraft were shifting their inbound paths, adjusting altitude and heading. The Luftwaffe wasn't retreating. They were probing, testing, learning. And somewhere out there, beyond the edge of Rawlins' screen, was the pilot who commanded this wave of night attacks. The one the Allies called the Ghost of Bonn. A veteran night raider who had slipped past British mosquitoes for 2 years. A pilot whose record made him a legend among German crews. Harrington stared into the black horizon. If this ghost was out there, tonight might be the first time he realized the darkness no longer protected him. Rawlins' voice came through again, quieter this time, almost hesitant. "Tom, I've got something." Harrington straightened in his seat. His gloved fingers hovered over the throttles as he felt the tone in Rawlins' voice change. This wasn't the clipped precision of tracking another bomber. This was something else, something he hadn't heard all night. Define something. Rawlins exhaled slowly. "It's a single contact, very faint, very high, altitude 30,000 plus, holding a straight course. Not a bomber. Not anything we've seen tonight." Harrington felt a cold tightening in his chest. 30,000 feet was a strange place for a raider to fly alone. Too high for the usual bomb runs, too steady for a damaged straggler. Yet steady enough to be purposeful. He asked the question he already knew mattered. "Heading?" Rawlins leaned closer to his screen. "North-northwest. Straight toward Allied lines. No deviation, no drift." Harrington adjusted the P-61 upward, feeling the aircraft strain as they began a gentle climb. Frost thickened on the windscreen. The night grew quieter the higher they rose, the engines flattening into a more labored pitch. Rawlins spoke again, more certain now. "Tom, this has to be him. The Ghost of Bonn." The Luftwaffe ace who seemed to materialize from the night, strike a target with inhuman accuracy, then vanish into nothing. British night fighters had tried for months to track him. None had succeeded. Some claimed he flew with no lights, no radio, and no pattern. Others swore he used natural terrain reflections to trick radar. A few even insisted he had memorized cloud formations and moonlight angles like a map. But Harrington didn't believe in legends. He believed in signatures. Radar signatures. Every aircraft left one, and Rawlins was reading this one with increasing confidence. Range 40 miles, high altitude, small return. Probably a fighter. WWII G6 would be my guess. A dedicated night fighter. Fast, well-armed, deadly in the hands of an ace. "Perfect prey," Harrington whispered, though he doubted the ghost saw himself that way. The P-61 climbed steadily, airspeed dropping as they approached thinner atmosphere. Harrington trimmed the aircraft carefully, balancing lift and power. His breath came in slow, measured pulls through the oxygen mask. Rawlins updated. 35 miles. Maintaining course. No reaction. If the Ghost had radar, he wasn't using it. Or he had seen something earlier and dismissed it. Harrington thought of the German pilots earlier, laughing in their briefings about the so-called American night fighter. They had no idea how far the Black Widow had come. How expertly crews had learned to use its radar. How devastating it had become in the hands of pilots who trusted the machine as much as their instincts. Tonight, one of those pilots was hunting them. Rawlins again. 28 miles. Still no alteration in speed or heading. This guy is either very confident or completely unaware. Harrington adjusted his gloves and rubbed the frost from the canopy edge. Confidence and unawareness often look the same in the dark. Sometimes only the last 10 seconds revealed which one it truly was. The P-61 pushed onward, gaining altitude with a steady climb. The engines groaned under the strain, but held strong. Harrington gritted his teeth as they pierced into the colder upper layers of the night. Ice crackled along the edges of the wings. Rawlins called out softly, almost reverently. 20 miles. He's big, Tom. That return is too clean, too sharp. And he's not even checking his 6. A pilot that's skilled didn't neglect his surroundings without reason. He knew the night. He trusted it. The darkness had always been his ally. Harrington tilted his head slightly, peering up into the invisible heavens above. Tonight, the darkness belonged to someone else. Rawlins' voice came again. 15 miles. We'll have visual in maybe 5 minutes if he keeps steady. The Ghost was close. Harrington tightened his harness, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. This wasn't just another intercept. This was a duel in a world with no horizon, no landmarks, and no second chances. 2 night fighters, 1 hunter, 1 legend. Somewhere above, the ace who had escaped every trap was cutting through the frozen black air, unaware that the most advanced American night fighter ever built was rising silently behind him. Harrington pushed the throttles forward. The chase had begun. The climb grew harder as the P-61 neared 30,000 feet. Frost crawled across the edges of the canopy in delicate spider webs. The engines groaned under the thinning air. But Harrington held them steady, letting the Black Widow find its equilibrium in the icy upper sky. Every adjustment was subtle, every vibration a warning. High-altitude pursuit wasn't just a contest of skill. It was a battle against the night itself. Rawlins spoke in a whisper now, as if afraid the enemy could hear through the void. 10 miles. His return is rock solid. No variation. He's not maneuvering. Harrington felt a pulse of adrenaline. No maneuvering meant confidence, or arrogance, or a pilot who believed no one could reach his altitude. The Ghost had evaded British mosquitoes for months by flying higher than their radar could reliably track. But this wasn't a mosquito. This was the P-61 Black Widow. Rawlins continued. 7 miles. Closing fast. Still no reaction. He has no idea. Harrington tilted the Black Widow slightly, adjusting their approach angle. The sky above was absolute darkness, deeper and more oppressive than anything below. Even starlight seemed swallowed at this altitude. Their only guide was the faint glow of the instruments and the ghostly sweep of Rawlins' radar. 6 miles. 5, 4. Then Rawlins' voice sharpened. Visual soon, very soon. Harrington's breath slowed. His gloved hand steadied on the yoke. Every sense reached outward into the blackness, searching for the faintest hint of a silhouette. And then he saw it. A shape materialized ahead. A darker patch of darkness, nearly invisible against the void. Sleek, narrow, twin engines. The distinct, predatory outline of a Junkers 88 G6 night fighter. The Ghost of Bonn. He flew with immaculate stability, wings level, engines glowing faintly in the chill air. No weaving, no checking his tail, no sign of caution. Just a steady, unwavering confidence that the night sky still belonged to him. Harrington eased the Widow into pursuit, the distance closed with glacial precision. 2,000 yards, 1,800, 1,500, Rawlins whispered. He still doesn't see us. You're in the pocket. Harrington aligned the gun sight gently, keeping the Widow just outside the German pilot's peripheral field. His thumb rested lightly on the trigger. He steadied his breathing. But something shifted. The Junkers dipped a fraction of a degree. Not much, not a turn, just a subtle motion, a pilot's instinct, a flicker of intuition. Rawlins tensed. Tom, he might feel us. Harrington acted. He squeezed the trigger. The Black Widow roared. 20-millimeter shells erupted forward, streaking across the night in a burst of white-hot fury. The tracers carved through the darkness and struck the Junker's port wing before the Ghost could react. Sparks flared across the airframe. A fuel line ruptured. A panel tore free and spun into the void. The German pilot yanked the stick hard. The Junkers rolled violently, diving into a steep bank. For the first time in his storied career, the Ghost of Bonn was caught off guard. Rawlins called out, "He's diving! Hard!" Harrington followed, banking the P-61 into a tight pursuit arc. The Black Widow groaned under the stress. But the airframe held. The distance shrank again. Harrington fired another burst. This one shredded through the Junker's tail assembly, slicing control cables and puncturing the left engine. Flames bloomed along the nacelle. The Ghost fought back. A streak of muzzle flashes lit the night from the Junker's forward guns. Rounds whistled past the Widow, ripping through cold air. One round struck the left wingtip of the P-61, punching a neat hole through the outer panel. The Widow shook. But Harrington held his line. Rawlins shouted, "He's trying to shake us." Harrington responded with calm precision. "Not tonight." He pulled into a tightening pursuit angle, cutting inside the Junker's dive. The burning German fighter leveled out desperately, smoke pouring from its wounded engine. Harrington pressed the trigger one final time. The burst walked across the bomber's spine, punching through the fuselage, igniting fuel, rupturing ammunition. A second later, the Junkers exploded in a brilliant flash, a silent bloom of fire that illuminated the high-altitude clouds in a ghostly glow. The debris scattered like embers from a dying star. Rawlins breathed out, almost in disbelief. "You got him." Harrington watched the flames fade into the abyss below. The Ghost of Bonn, the ace who once ruled Europe's nights, had been found, not by luck, not by chance, but by the aircraft designed to hunt in darkness and the crew who understood how to command it. Harrington turned the Widow toward home. The engines droned steadily, guiding them back toward Allied lines. The sky around them was still cold and black, but something fundamental had changed. The night no longer belonged to the Luftwaffe. It belonged to the P-61 Black Widow.